everyone, welcome to the show. My name is Amanda Ostrander. I am a teacher-turned-homeschool mom, and this is Raising A to Z, a place where we talk about all things homeschooling. And today I'm going to talk about how to homeschool your kids legally in the province of Ontario. So, I want to start by saying homeschooling is legal across Canada. You are allowed to homeschool your child legally in every single province in this great country. The only thing that makes it tricky is every single province has different rules, regulations, and requirements for homeschooling. It is very important that you follow the rules and regulations in your home province. So whatever province you are currently living in and reside in, it is important that you follow those rules. You can travel to other provinces for a small amount of time, but you need to follow the rules that are in your specific province where you call home. That is very important. And the rules that are required vary drastically across the country. Some places like Quebec have very, very strict laws. They have the strictest laws in all of Canada. And then you have other places like Ontario that have some of the laxest laws in all of Canada. We live in Ontario. I feel comfortable talking about what is the requirements here in Ontario. If you live in a different province, please, by all means, double check and make sure that you know what the requirements are in your province. But here in Ontario, we have very, very lax rules. And we kind of love them. We love the laxity of the rules that we have in here because it really gives us a lot of freedom to teach our kids and to teach them the way that we want them to be taught and the way that they need to be taught. Basically, there are 3 different scenarios in which you might fall into as a homeschooler in Ontario. Situation number 1. If your child has never, ever, ever been registered for school, they've never been put into an educational system, if they are not in a school, if they are never been registered for school, this gets kind of tricky. Sometimes you have parents who have registered their kids in like March and then decide over the summer they don't want to send them to school, they're going to homeschool. If you're going to fall into a different category. But if you have never registered your kids for school, you don't have to do anything. Because they have never been registered, you are not required to inform their school of the school board that they are going to be homeschooled. You don't have to. First off, you don't have to. Secondly, how would you know? We live in a town where there are 4 different school boards. We have the English Catholic, French Catholic, English Public, and French Public. There's no way of knowing which school my kids would be going to. So you don't have to report. You don't have to tell them anything. Basically, you're just off the radar. So that's situation number 1. That's the situation that we're in because my kids have never been registered. Situation number 2, which is probably the most common situation that you will see, is if your child has been in school. If you have registered your child for school, if they have gone to school, if they are currently in school and you want to start homeschooling them, you're in situation number 2. All you need to do is send a letter of intent, which is basically a letter that has their name, their age, their birth date, the grade they're in, their school, and say that as of now, I will be homeschooling my child. If you want an example of what that looks like, the Ontario Federation of Teaching Parents has a template. I will put the link below for you. And you can fill it out and send it to your school board. I recommend sending it by email because it will give you an automatic timestamp that you have in fact submitted your letter. That is all you are required to do. Send the letter to the school board. That's it. Now, you can send a letter to your school's principal. That is kind of more seen as like a courtesy thing, just to let them know that your child is now being disenrolled and that they don't have to take attendance or account for this child. But you aren't legally required to do that. You don't have to do that. But you do need to send a letter to your child's school board. Like I said, email is best. And they are supposed to send you back an acknowledgement that they have in fact received your letter. Things to note. Sometimes your acknowledgement is going to take a while. Some school boards have a lot of homeschool kids and they'll have a designated person who is there to send acknowledgements back. Or as soon as they see it as a letter of intent, they have an automatic form that they just click and send. Some are great like that. And you'll get it I've seen people get it within an hour. Some school boards will take a long time in sending their letter. Oftentimes it's when parents are sending letters, like in August. Schools are not really they don't really care about the homeschoolers at that point, because their focus is getting all the kids, all the files transferred to the right grade, making sure the kids are in the right classes, splitting up classes, transferring kids from one school to another. Like, they're in the logistics of getting the students who are actually going to be attending their school worked out. They're not necessarily so concerned about the kids who've decided not to come to school this year. So oftentimes you're going to see that if you're submitting your letter kind of end of June or early or late August, you're not going to get a letter of acknowledgement back quickly because they're just too busy. But that's why we send it by email. So you do have the timestamp that it was submitted, even if it takes them 2, 3, 4 months to submit it back to you. Another thing to note, some school boards, 2 things to note. I recommend sending the Ontario Federation of Teaching Parents letter of intent or something very similar. Not the letter that your school sends, because some schools recently have started adding like little caveats at the bottom of their letters. Things like I have seen recently that a friend of mine had her kids in a French school, and at the bottom of their like notice to homeschool, they had a form for like, oh, we want to homeschool our kids. You just fill it out. But at the bottom it had, I promise to homeschool my children in French, was at the bottom. So you do not need to do that. You are not required to homeschool your kids in a certain language, even if they started in that language or whatever. Send the Ontario Federation of Teaching Parents letter or something very similar, and you are golden. You're good to go. The other thing to acknowledge is that some school boards are great and they will just send your acknowledgement and you're good to go. Other school boards will send back an entire package of things that they want you to fill out in order to homeschool your child. I would like to make this very clear that you are not required to fill out any paperwork from the school board once you've sent your letter of acknowledgement, and nor should you, because they are well aware that they're not supposed to send this stuff, and they continue to do it. So don't set the precedence that this is going to be what is expected of you. You do not have to tell them what you're teaching, where you're teaching, how you're teaching, what materials you're using, how your kids are going to socialize. You don't have to tell them any of that. You just have to submit your letter of intent, and that is it. Don't fall for the scare tactic of, here's an 8-page document you need to fill out in order for us to approve it. You do not need their approval. You are just informing them of the fact that your kids are not going to be homeschooled. That's what we're doing. So that is what we're doing. That is, if you were situation number 2, if your kids have been in school, you just need to send a letter of intent to the school board. It is really that simple. How often do you send your letter of intent? It is recommended you send it every year that your child is in that school board. It just makes it easier for them to have on the record that this child is no longer going to be attending the school. It does get a little tricky if your child if you move. You do not have to send a letter of intent afterwards because your child has never been registered in that local school board. If you change provinces, you don't have to send a letter back to the former school board. Basically, as long as you are living in that school district and that would be your child's homeschool board or homeschool, then you send a letter of intent every single year. Like I said, just copy and paste it and send it. Like, it's not a big deal. Some people like to risk that they don't need it. Some schools have even written back that like once you've sent it, you don't have to. But I always err on the side of caution that you would hate to be like called out for not sending the right documents. It takes you 2 minutes to send it to your school board. So just do it. Do it once a year. Cover your butts. Make sure you're good. The third situation is where things get a little bit more tricky, and it's kind of more situational than really legal. Again, you're going to submit your letter of intent, but this time you're doing it in order to get that letter of acknowledgement back from the school board, because you need the letter of acknowledgement for various reasons. So for example, if your child needs certain therapies that would be typically offered through the school, you are still entitled to those things. So because our health and our education here in Ontario are very linked. So if your kid is supposed to be getting things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, therapies for autism or anything like that, your child is still entitled to those. You just need your letter of acknowledgement to take it to the healthcare provider. That is kind of one of the situations where you really, really do want that letter of acknowledgement. It is a little tricky because you still have to like sometimes wait for it. But you are still entitled, but you would need that letter of acknowledgement to get the publicly covered, publicly funded resources available to you. I know that sometimes it's a bit of a hassle. We personally are using speech therapy with my youngest daughter, and we've opted to just pay out of pocket, have our insurance cover and pay out of pocket. Not so much because of the hassle of getting her a letter of acknowledgement, but just the wait times. Sometimes, like, I think it was a two-year wait if we registered her now to get publicly covered speech therapy. So we opted to just go private, but sometimes those things are just not in your budget, and then you really do need that letter of acknowledgement and to get them publicly covered. And I think that's important and it's valid, and that's just a way to make sure that you're not double dipping. Some people also, if you're like in a court battle or like a custody situation, you might need the letter of acknowledgement in that kind of situation. That's also a reason why I recommend that people submit their letters every year, because if in the case that you have been, for example, homeschooling for 5 years and you separate and get divorced and you want to continue homeschooling, your partner does not, the fact that this has been the kid's norm and that you have evidence of that can sometimes help you in that situation. That's not legal advice, but it is just showing what your children's norm is and that you do have that letter of intent and acknowledgement. But basically, if you need that letter of acknowledgement, you're doing the same thing as situation 2. You're submitting a letter to the school board and they are going to submit you a letter of acknowledgement back. That's it. And in terms of what else you're required to do if you live in Ontario, that's it. You submit a letter once a year if you have to. And that's it. You're done. Yes, Ontario is incredibly lax. We have a large degree of freedom in Ontario, and we like it. And we don't just like it, we love it. I know other provinces, for example, BC gets a rap. They've got the moniker of like the best province to homeschool in, because they do offer like funding for homeschoolers, and there's different levels. And I know people in Ontario who are often like, well, we want to have funding. And I always say no. I would take the laxity that we have over funding every day. Because when you add money that comes from the government, there's going to be strings, and those strings are going to be rules, regulations, testing, all kinds of things. Whether it is having to have your kids, some people and I don't think people realize how much extra it is. So for some of the places that do offer funding, sometimes it's a full annual plan. Sometimes it's annual testing where your kids have to go in and prove that they are in fact at the grade level. Sometimes it's visits. I know that I knew somebody I know, they lived, I think it was Alberta or BC. To get the maximum funding, they had to have someone come into their home every single month and prove to them that they were, teaching what was expected, teaching what was appropriate, that the kids had all these opportunities, and had to have a teacher basically sit through and go through all of their lesson work, go through all their stuff and say, yes, you are allowed to continue. Here's the money, basically. So I will take being able to just send a letter and be done over jumping through any of those hoops any day. It's not worth the $500. In my opinion, it's not worth $1,000 to have someone in my home every single month to tell me that I'm allowed to homeschool. So be thankful that you're in Ontario. Take it, run with it, and enjoy your homeschooling journey. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, make sure that you click subscribe and the bell so you get notifications. Make sure that you're following me on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can also become a YouTube member where you get bonus content, bonus videos, coupons, all kinds of cool stuff. So make sure you check into that as well. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.